Welcome back, everyone. Today we've got two professors for the price of one. I've got Professor Tony Myers, who is at Newman University and is a professor of quantitative methods. Is that right, Tony?
That's correct. Yeah, it is. Yeah, and it's called Birmingham Newman University, just because I think people didn't know where it was. So the name changed very recently. It's now Birmingham Newman University, so people know we're in the Midlands and in Birmingham.
And I visited Birmingham Newman University relatively recently, about a year ago, and really lovely campus.
It is nice. Yeah.
It is. It's very, very pleasant, and a really interesting place. We'll maybe jump into a bit of that as we go on. But Tony, I know you were recently at Coventry doing some presentation on AI and research, and somebody said, "Oh, this was the best presentation they'd seen." And I've been following some of your work. You've done a whole load of stuff, but for the viewers, tell us who you are and how you sort of get to this place now.
Yeah, so with AI, so what it is the two focuses of my. I mean, I've got an interest in it. A bit like you, I'm a bit of an AI evangelist and trying to, see where it can go. So I've got an interest in both from a teaching perspective. So teaching students, how can we really, I guess, if possible, close that attainment gap we see from all sorts of angles, and can AI help with that? And then from a research perspective, given it is happening whether we want it to or not. We've, just papers out very recently to say, fake citations in published research is increasing, that we've got, very competent tools now to analyze data. My background, as you mentioned, is quantitative analysis. So doing stats for people, and people can use the tools now very well. Now, there's sometimes people argue and go, but it's cheating. But I'll point out the fact it's a new tool, and that they've probably used things like SPSS or some other statistical software, which means they haven't done the maths themselves. In fact, in the type of statistics I do, which is Bayesian statistics, you really can't do it by hand. You have to simulate lots of stuff. So there's already software and things. So it's about, how do we navigate this new world where it can be really useful rather than it, and we've tried not to ban it at Birmingham Newman. We've tried to, in fact, we don't ban it. And my suggestion again for Coventry was the same thing, really, for research. We've got, I think the England New Journal of Medicine has now got an AI and human sort of peer review system, and they try and merge the benefits rather than sort of banning AI. So I think that's where my interest was, in terms of how do we use AI ethically, legitimately, not trying to say that, it does things that we don't do as well, but we do things that AI currently can't do as well as. So it's trying to get the best of both worlds, really.
No, I absolutely agree. I can tell you, for me, when I first started using, and I think when I'm talking about AI, I'm talking about generative AI, and I
Me too, in the main, yeah.
In the main, but there was I think when I first started using it, I was a little bit skeptical, and I know that a lot of my academic colleagues remain quite skeptical. Was that your journey, or was there a moment when you thought, oh, actually, this is something that is really interesting and needs sort of serious thought?
Yeah, similarly, I guess I think it was probably 4.0, Chat GTP 4 or 4.0 was the time when I thought, actually, this is no longer does it make up plausible, sort of very loose, generic sounding essays, but actually can be used more seriously as a tool. Yes, we still need to verify things. Clearly, at that point, particularly, it was making up references for academic work, so it was with academic work, but it was also possible to say, to prompt and say, give me the DOI for this, give me the digital operating index. And I can check that manually to see, one, whether it existed, and two, whether it said what the claims were. So having sort of that sort of systems proved to be useful, really, and not given that, I wanted to find a little bit more about how these models work, the generative AI models work, transform models work, what they were, statistically how we might support that if we're trying to look at outputs, how that verification, and the fact that even though they've got obviously clearly worked on getting that much better, and there's much less in terms of hallucinated references in academic context, it's, still the nature of the model is it's a predictive probability, and so it's going to guess the best answer if it's not got it in the training data to hand. And so it was trying to understand that, and then saying, how can we play with things again, for those that might know about the sort of parameters you set on a local model. It's less easy on commercial models like temperature, where you can really set that down to zero to make it very deterministic. So it'll repeat what it said, given the same model, the same setup. You will get the same output, which can be useful in some contexts for generating statistical code, for example. We had some debates that, where people were going, look, it's not, can't replicate things. So, well, it depends what you do. Really, you can if you adjust particular parameters and you have the same model. Clearly, if you have a different model, different training data, different parameter settings, then you're going to get different outputs. That's, because it's about that probability bit. If you've got a higher temperature, it's going to generate more stuff, which can be useful in some context, generating ideas, for example. So it's all to know about some of the background to what these models do, I think. And that started me saying, I think we do need to take this seriously. Not only that, students were using it as soon as it came out. And clearly it's not just students. I'm not blaming students as being, we've got academics, major academics. If you look at some of the literature on papers produced, written by, even where journals, and there's not much difference between the journals that say they shouldn't or they should declare it to those that don't, in fact, potentially higher for those that say you should declare it. People are using AI, and so it was saying, look, this reality is people are using AI. We need to make sure they use it well, because it clearly can be used very well. In fact, it can be used extremely productively, very effectively, used well. And so that was the starting point, really, for both research and education.
I think that's really interesting, that actually sort of understanding the model, and certainly with your models that you're running on your own systems, being able to have much more control and replicability of the outputs. I think that is really interesting. It's obviously one of the tenets of good research, that you can replicate the outcomes. And I think you're absolutely right. It's not something that it is one of the facets of AI that it feels a bit black boxy and is quite difficult to replicate. So I think that's really interesting, and probably goes to sort of my next point about sort of governance. I think I saw on LinkedIn you said recently you can't govern what you cannot yet question. And I guess if you have much better understanding of what is happening within the black box, it gives you a better chance of governing that. I mean, do you want to? I thought it was a great line. It stood out to me. Do you want to unpack that, and how do we get to asking the right questions?
Yeah, I think. I think what we can't do, I think, is check and sort of check for AI and say, look, you've cheated using AI. I think that's things that the system's not reliable enough. They're not reliable enough, and it's a point to me. There's a point where it became. You will have been around the time as well, where calculators came into schools, and maths teachers went out on the streets and said it's going to, and this sort of technological revolution across time, whether it was novels will be, the moral deprivation of females in the past, or even Socrates saying about memory and reading and writing. That's probably a slight exaggeration, but that's sort of the so we're at a point now where, particularly when we've got these statistical machines, we need to understand them as much, and we're trying to I think there's genuinely some where people are trying to look at saying, is the just LMM method the only method? And certainly to achieve the sort of things that people want to achieve, AGI or super intelligence, so we need to build in some other things. So there's been some strives towards building vision and building physical, because we need that idea of physics. As humans, we've got these unconscious things like an inbuilt physics from a baby, really understanding the world in terms of physical and visual input that a model hasn't got. It's a predictive machine, so it's at the moment, if you use an LMM, it's it predicts the next word very convincingly. I mean, people clearly have had massively detailed conversation, myself included, about AI and where it's going, and philosophical debates, because it can pull on huge amounts of resources in terms of that, and give very, not just plausible now, but I think the Turing test, for those who are aware of it, was about, could a machine, when you interact with the machine, would it, could you tell whether it was a machine or a human? I think the point's passed. I don't genuinely think you could. So in terms of governance, is you've got to have some sensible, sensible. It's saying the person, whoever's doing it, is responsible. So in terms of governing academic outputs, whether they use AI or not, and there's enough research that's flawed and biased before AI, and with AI, it's another tool. Whether people misunderstand using statistics, there's bigger claims. It's in academic terms, the sort of the publication game is how people get status, and so they are going to shape things, because it's not about necessarily quality in some sense. It's about, do you get the right journals, but really some of that's very subjective and arbitrary. So trying to govern it in some sort of way where you're going to say we're in control of these it's better for me to say the person's the author, whatever tool they've used, they're responsible. We need to check it in whatever way we can. And we've had PhD students now where people are going, look, there's some fabricated references. And it's not even, they may well have actually looked and they've rushed secondary references which have already been fabricated. It's not necessarily saying, they're necessarily, I mean, they're at fault potentially for not checking everything, but it's about verification. It's about it. We can't, these are things that are not human, but we need to say, if you're going to do the research, you're responsible, whatever the output is, however polished. And to be honest, if you're a non-English speaking person who has to publish in, which is, potentially the biggest area for academic publications, English language publications, then what, it's wrong really to stop people using tools that make that sensible or cheap. It's fine saying, well, you get go with that, pay our sort of language specialists at the journal to retweak it and make it sound good. Well, that's really not so good, because that's adding an extra cost, and AI can do the job very well, really. So governance is really about sensible approaches to what we can and can't do, and we're not very good at knowing whether it's, people can write very similar. I mean, I just in this software to check, not as an AI detection tool necessarily, but I generated, just for fun really, generated about 120 AI from different AI major frontier models on various things to do with academic argument. And so it plots out things like frequency of words, how diverse the sentences are, what paragraph structures used, how hedging the languages. So do you very, very certain, or you potentially, possibly, and it gives a visual picture of what you've got compared to what, if you put your own text in, what AI's got, and some things are right quite similarly to AI, and some things are right quite differently. And I think that's the thing, really. Sometimes that unusualness can be really attractive to people, but really, if English is not your first language, then it's a really useful tool in anything, whether that's academic study, or whether it's publishing, or in business, or anything else really, or translate into different languages to communicate. I don't think, in a sense, government should be punitive. I think it should be understanding where we're at and trying to support people to verify, to take ownership of these things.
I mean, I absolutely agree with you. I think that the ability for AI to support diversity and to support, and the technology is, it gives you access to tools and knowledge and information that, it's democratizing, if you like, in certain cases. Do you think, and I absolutely agree with you, and it is the sort of bedrock of governance, that you have responsibility for what you produce, whether you used AI or not, and it's a fallback. Do you think that's enough? Do you think just having that as the fallback is enough, or do we potentially need to go a bit further especially, I guess, especially in the academic world, where I think one of the things that I worry about, and I know that I talk to students, and some students worry terribly about using AI at all for fear of being caught and thrown off the course and reputational damage, etc. And I think there was I may be wrong, but I think there was a study in Australia where quite a long time ago, 2 or 3 years ago, a long time in AI, that said that a lot of people didn't use AI because of their concern about the reputational damage or being thrown off their course. So, is that taking personal responsibility enough, or do we need more guidelines, support, etc., so that students and academics can use the technology effectively?
I do think we need guidelines, to be honest. But they need to be realistic. I think where you just say people can't use AI, it's probably naive. People do tend to. So, from my own perspective, at Birmingham Newman, I recognise the fact that students will use it badly, and actually AI literacy is going to be really important in the future for people, just like digital literacy, just like general literacy. In fact, they're very strongly linked, to be honest. So I think, we as academics, or as sort of professionals, are very used to constructing arguments, very used to putting things down in writing and also reading, whether that's verbalizing it or it's text. Those arguments, it becomes easy. But if you've not got that background, it's actually a bit of a minefield. And it's where you usually see people falling down with outputs because they just don't know quite how to prompt or how to read or how to put arguments forward or consume. So it's still all those basic things are really important. But in terms of what I tried to do with students at Newman is a couple of modules that they did for me. Well, in fact, three. One's a newer module where I've done it now for a couple of years, where students have had to use AI. Now, there's a bit of, certainly people saying, well, that's a bit bad because, there's all sorts of ethical things there about, it's destroying the, big, huge thing in Chile. We've got, marginalised populations used as checking mechanisms and, huge resources taken, etc., which are fair enough. But it's just like, again, like cars driving to work or aeroplanes to work. It's becoming whether we did this or not, that's still happening. Us protesting a little bit, we can certainly protest, but students, if they need to use it, my argument was, so we get them to use AI, we get them to say what tools they used. So they have a form alongside, it's marked, so they get a grade on it. So it's like worth about 30%. That one of the tasks is to write a research proposal for the dissertation for the following year, and they're able to use AI tools to both read the literature or support which you get reading journal articles can be a bit challenging, a bit dry, but it can turn them into a podcast. It can contrast articles, again, as long as they go back and check that it's not hallucinated. Then that can be useful. So what tools have they used? They have to put that in a form, an AI evidence sheet, we call it, where they say what tools have used, what prompts or information have they given to the model. So have they, the detail of that will affect an impact on the output, and how examples, for example. So we give them some input on 0-shot prompts or 1-shot prompts where they learn to give examples of what they want. So it tells the AI how to, structure things, what they want out of it. So they, again, get more marks if they do that a little bit better. Importantly, how they fact check. So what have they done to actually check the information is correct? Is it just a Google Scholar search to say it exists, or have they gone a little bit more in more depth to say, well, are the claims, what's the evidence of the claims? And this is not unusual. This is still a challenge without AI because they've still got to do that. Where you've got academic evidence where they probably don't quite get the stats, and they've got to go, which are there's two contrasting views here. How do I decide which is better? And, is it just how many participants they had, or is it the arguments? So all of these things have always been there, but it's making it explicit on an AI evidence sheet. And then they have to say their critical factors. So which bits did they choose to leave out of their eventual product, and which did they choose to keep in, and why? So it's that process really of saying, not only can you use models, you've got to use models, but in the end, you might not use any of the content of the model if in the end you felt your work was better without it. But you still got to go through that process and using it as a co-pilot, not in the Microsoft Copilot sense, but somebody who's there supporting you as an assistant. Yet you might choose to reject what it says, or you might choose to take bits of it. So that's the sort of basis for the academic, and in a way that sort of could be applied in a journal sense. Perhaps less easy, but there's that some of those elements might be able to be in a sort of certainly for PhD students or postgrad students anyway.
That's, I think that's a really, really useful run through of a learning process using AI. And you can see that going through that process, students are learning how to critically analyze what they're getting back, how to refine the prompting, how to dig deeper into it. And, I hope that we're seeing courses in a similar way across the whole of the university sector, because when they get into business, these are the skills that businesses are buying, aren't they? Not, that, and having being able to demonstrate that you can do that, you can use these tools effectively is really, really important. And yeah, I think it's thank you for that. I think really, really useful just to understand that, and it's part of that governance piece as well, isn't it? If you're being open and transparent about how you're using AI, that's part of the governance of it. It's something you can check. It's something that you can question, etc. And they can explain. That's and so you started talking about the research piece, and I know that you've done a lot of work in this area with a sort of formulation of prompting. Is it called valid that can be used in
It's sort
researches?
of a process of so it's a process of sort of and it's on the put it on the website. It's just, again, I mean, it's an acronym, but in a sense it's about going through just a process of things where we check and validate particular things, and that's so it's those things that sort of, and giving people, I don't know, again, it's the prompt thing, whether it's and these are, I try in terms of prompting, I sort of said, should we really, I mean, there's lots and lots of, and sometimes really good resources on prompting, but should we try and prompt, given we know about at least some of the background to the architecture we've got? So should we really, focus on that architecture and say, prompts at least match the architecture where we know? So things like, we know that the architecture is likely to hallucinate, and just by asking it not to is not going to change, but we can ask for particular things where we can verify. So it's about saying, what can we verify? So what given out. So for example, in terms of data analysis, it might be particular artifacts like model outcomes, like the particular statistics that we can check, and perhaps an interpretation, and we can check against other sources whether those are true. I mean, I did whether we can validate that. I did you'll be aware of RAG systems where they're not LLMs, but they're, it's basically like a document or a database. In the cases of I was using documents, where it was using a system where it was saying, got this output from a platform which is called Julius AI, one of the platforms, very good, links to the major frontier models like 5.5 and whatever, Claude, etc. And you can ask it to produce output in R, which is statistical software that those who are in statistics know, or Python, that are more general language that's often used and associated with AI. And you can get then products out of there that you can check. So you can say, give me the, and if you request these things, it makes checking and validating the outputs much more straightforward, because you can go, this is the claim, this is the output. And I used, so some of it's machine learning, but it's not an LLM, so it won't hallucinate in the same way. It's a semantic search, it searches, checks, and comes up with and I can use a local model for that completely, so you don't have to put, if there's any sensitive stuff in there. It'll come up with saying, yes, there's this, check this. And it doesn't say it's true or false, but it'll say this is worth thinking about because it seems that it's making us to a causal claim that this caused this, when it was only an associative, just a relationship value that could be claimed from the model or whatever it happens to be. And it's the same for any process really. So if you're asking for whether it's business or whether it's research, you're saying you want something you genuinely could check. So it might be if you're doing an academic writing piece, it might be, as I said before, provide the reference with a digital operator index so I can actually click on that and look and check whether the stuff's there. It might, it might be, where's the evidence? So might, you can have usually in these chat bot type scenarios like ChatGPT, etc. You can put a context statement, a personalized statement in which always says, always this, and so that's useful to say everything, check everything. I want evidence of every claim you make, and that can be useful verification. Again, you have got to check it because it might not. I mean, now they are getting superbly good, and you don't necessarily. I mean, I'm not saying you don't need to check. You do, but the checking now generally means they exist. It's much better. The later models, which are as you said before, it's accelerating at such a rate. So we're talking about models that have been around for a couple of months really, but they've got significantly better, and they're only going to go better still, I would assume. And so some of that, they've obviously taken note of some of that sort of those issues with large language models and trying to address them in various ways. But it seems to be working because they are getting less. But it's still about that process of making sure that giving examples is good, but making sure a role for the model, was it, what are you saying you are to try and narrow down the focus? You're an academic. Well, it's not going to make it an academic expert, but it might target things a little bit more if you're saying you're an academic or a journal reviewer, please critique this and provide evidence of it, etc., etc. So it's that sort of check-in, but getting output that can really be verified. So you're sort of telling it what you want as an output, really.
I think this is so interesting for me. So I joined academia late, and really wasn't until I did my PhD that I worked out that actually there's a process to all of this, and it's a process that's been developed over hundreds of years of finding information, checking it, looking for theory, building on it, all that sort of thing, and actually building some of that into the way we use these tools, as you've talked about, makes absolute sense. And it's not new, is it? It's how academics have worked for hundreds of years, and so bringing that discipline into the academic field is it's as always, often the most obvious things are the most clever things, it's that was really interesting. And I know you built some tools as well. Did you? You've built a tool around sort of interviewing? Is that?
Well, a few things, yeah. So there's one of them is so it was interesting to play because essentially LLM is a language model. So I wanted to look at, and there's been stuff on statistics. Now there has been a bit of stuff on qualitative research. So there's a few things I wanted to try out really. One, I mean, even though I'm a background's quantitative, I've supervised as many recently students are doing qualitative research, PhD students as qualitative really, or mixed method at least. And so interviewing and using, and particularly, I mean, background was really in sports psychology, sport and exercise psychology. So some of the students are using various qualitative techniques. One of them is called interpretive phenomenological analysis, which essentially tries to grasp people's experiences. Started in health research, moved to sport and exercise psychology and other areas. And so it's a very sort of human type activity in the sense that we try to capture what people meant by it. Their interprets. It's technically called a double hermeneutic. So you're interpreting someone's interpretation of their experiences. It was linked to sort of, I think, about text. The word that was looked at when we interpret texts. But I wanted to see whether AI model, how good would it be? We've done some research. In fact, I share an office with a former PhD student of mine who's interested really in mental toughness, and particularly now mental toughness in rugby, but one of the things he did and didn't include in his PhD in the end was one where he looked at mental toughness in Paralympians. So we decided, he's got all the transcripts all anonymized. So we decided to use how close would it be to our analysis? Now he was a little bit skeptical initially. But when he did, I said, "Look, Al, it's the same as you produced. They're slightly different names to the themes, but actually, the substance of what you've got out of this, and that I verified, if you like, verified is probably a strong word, but had a look at and sort of agreed with the gist of what you've said and how it was supported by what people had said. That was actually reasonably good. So we then tweaked it and said, it's okay. So I guess it's a language model, and even though these are experiences that they're put into language, so it's actually people expressing language, which LMMs are really good at. Wanted to then try and play with saying, well, let's suppose a reflexivity, for those who know about qualitative research would know what I mean, but what it really means is, so given my background, given my cultural situation, I'm bound to have some biases or some, not necessarily even bias is probably too strong a word. I'll have a perspective on something that might give me a different perspective than someone else. And so that reflexivity changes the way people might see the same evidence. So we wanted to tweak in and say, well, suppose we have a look at this, the mental toughness interviews, but if you were a female who's been congenitally disabled, so you actually grew up with the disability, and what things, given what things would AI pick up if we gave that persona, that reflexive stance, compared to say somebody who's a bit nearer my age, that and they've perhaps had a quite mental toughness, almost physicality, and so it was interesting how it pulled out differences. So it was a tool really to say, actually this wouldn't be bad when we do that. We're looking to do something building up on interviews now, perhaps as an assistant to say, well, let's just give it personas we can't actually have or own and see whether we get a different angle on things that might be really useful in terms of, looking at this. So that was so there's two things in qualitative. That was the sort of analysis, the qualitative analysis bit. And the other thing which also relates to Al is he's a rugby coach. He does rugby, sort of works with the RFU, and they want to try and diversify really those that are involved in rugby, because it tends to be very white middle class in the main. But they wanted to go into the Birmingham area, which is much more diverse, and try and give tester sessions and give sessions in the schools where they're much more mixed ethnically, and see what they felt about it. And given they were youngsters, we were trying to build something where it was a bit like a voice bot, where it would be on essentially on the phones, and it would ask in speaking to them and saying, okay, so great, how did you feel about the session? What did you, and responding, basically responding back in words, but recording what they'd said. Obviously, this would be a research thing, so they'd have to agree, the usual confidentiality and et cetera, et cetera. But it would, we haven't actually used this, but we did test it out with us. So we tested out, and it's reasonably effective, to be honest. So I think I was saying to people in the lecture at COV, if you are collecting data, it's worth having a play and seeing, certainly even if, these were tools were built on fairly cheaply, really. It was an API that's a link to I think I use DeepSeek because it's so cheap, and Google Speak, and there's a few different things. And to be honest now, you'll be aware of, with agentic AI, you can get Codex or Claude Code or something else if you're, confident enough with a computer to say, I don't mind using Terminal, or I don't mind using some of these things, and as long as I control things and be safe, it will produce some of these things. You can ask it and tweak it, and so it does produce some quite useful things now. So we've had to play with that type of thing. So in terms of both collecting qualitative data, so interview data, and also analysing it, they're two things we've had to play with.
I think that it's an area. I think about 6 months ago, I got quite excited about simulation, digital twins, having alternative personas, and I think it's an area where AI can work. It can be really effective, not least because It's the other side of that coin. We know that it's got bias built in because it's our biases that it's built in, but because you know it's there, you can tweak for it. You can draw it out. You can say, okay, well, let's look at it from a very different perspective. I think that could be a very powerful way of using AI. Now, one of the things that academic colleagues always say to me, one of the big problems with AI is the impact that it has on assessment. And I know that you've done some work around this piece about how, do we have to give away every essay course because you can't assess it effectively. What's your thinking around how is the academic world going to have to respond to the way effective assessment can work?
I think in some ways it actually can balance things that we've probably got wrong for a while, really. So, and I'm certainly not saying essays are bad at all. In fact, in some areas they're really important, and certainly constructing an argument. And what we've tried to build in now is getting people to actually write well, because even if they're only going to use AI, or they're going to use AI, not only, they're going to use AI, they need to be able to prompt and write and read well. So constructing very coherent text without the use of AI is really important. But to do that, we just are going to have to get them to do that by hand, either in an exam browser, in typing, without an internet connection or whatever. But in essence, it's often about saying, is an essay the best way to assess this particular thing? So it's almost going to say, is this what do we really want the students to know? And certainly an essay written by hand can be really useful in being able to articulate arguments, being balancing evidence, but also you can do it in many other ways. In some ways, you can do it more authentic ways that you might be in terms of what they're going to need to use it for after university. So in a verbal argument, persuasive pitch, or whatever it happens to be, then certainly AI can help saying, well, think about, I mean, I've found AI useful in saying, this is what I think. Give me the counter argument. Tell me, this is my evidenced argument, but there's clearly not only one way of seeing it. Give me the alternative with evidence. How can you challenge this? And that, so it can be used to help tune those arguments, but in the end, you're going to have to deliver them and you have to go and understand them. And so in terms of, say, a dissertation, we've really had to reshape our dissertations because, well, clearly some students didn't understand. They produced quite a reasonable dissertation, but they didn't really understand what they'd done. So we've gone, okay, we're going to say potentially now you can use AI tools, however you want to shape what we're going to reduce now to a 3,000, a bit like a journal article output rather than be 10,000, 15,000 piece. You're going to have a project management section where you both arrange meetings with participants, arrange meetings with your supervisor, make minutes of those meetings, actually physically attend them and ask questions and send an agenda before that you're doing that, etc. They already record and interviews if they're doing interviews, or record data if they're doing data and evidence what they've done. But then the actual dissertation is as much the viva for it as the dissertation itself. So it's a sort of, they don't present, they submit the dissertation, which can be polished and they get marked on, but that's in combination with their viva, the questions about that. In all honesty, this is the first bit we've done the viva this year, and we've just done it given it's the marking period. And in all honesty, we were very surprised by how students actually knew. So they had used that, and we thought, do you know what? They might not have really understood this, but was very pleasantly surprised. And so some marks went up rather than down. In fact, as much as 25% to say clearly they really understood the nuances of this. They clearly understood what they'd done. And so it was quite refreshing to say that, given the fact we'd said, look, AI's got these limitations, these had gone through a process of saying what you should use it for. Could they have used AI better? Certainly they could. But actually, they did understand what they'd done, and some of the stuff that seemed a bit too polished, actually, their understanding was really good, and so it was a reasonable piece. It was a reasonable reflection of what they understood. And I think we've got to think about, what do we do? Do we do interviews? Do we do, some sport lends itself to something, coaching? Well, you can physically coach people, or nursing where you've actually got to treat a patient, or conduct an interview, or be an interviewee, or do a presentation, etc. And so it's some, those things, along with some traditional things, maybe contained a bit more if you really need them to be able to physically write or physically do something, is for me the way forward. In some ways, it's getting back to authentic assessment, whatever that is. That's a buzzword, but it can mean different things in different contexts. But we're not taking the approach. I think I've heard that. I think it was Berkeley. I just this morning where they're saying can't use AI, banning it completely, and it's probably not really sensible. But it's what
Or
they've
possible,
yeah. No, it's not possible. No,
almost impossible to enforce,
it is.
and also feels a bit short-sighted given.
Yeah, they're law school, I think, and I know, paralegals have been hit by the AI, because it's some of the AI's managed to take some of their roles. I guess perhaps that's why. I don't know, but yeah, I think it was Berkeley Law. I think.
I mean, it's refreshing to hear a positive story about using AI and students, because you certainly don't hear this in the media, and students actually benefiting from having the conversation, being able to probe in depth, to challenge the AI, to challenge their own thinking, because there's no doubt that that is an area, if you use it really well, it should be valuable. But actually, the fact that you're seeing some of that value is wonderful.
No,
It
it was
really,
really pleasing. It was very,
yeah.
very pleasing because we didn't know. We thought, we're going to have to perhaps how do we rethink this? Are they going to? But it's got well, actually, the majority, but no, you're always going to get the odd one. It's less competent, but they were much better than we expected. Perhaps but yes,
So
it was really, really pleasing to see how
no,
much.
it's fantastic. Now let's just jump into you a little bit more, because I know that you're also an expert on Muay Thai. Is that
Muay
right?
Thai, Muay Thai, yeah. So it's a combat sport, yeah. Thai, so it's a national sport of Thailand, where I've visited lots of times after I found the sport to train, and with a friend, yeah. So it's a sport where before AI, but I mean since, to be honest, I set a website up to help support some delivery of sort of how to coach and how, well, not so much how to coach, how to teach people to judge the sport, which I'd had some influence anyway. So I think I'd the way we sort of see things in the West generally, at least this was my thesis. The PhD was partly to do with this. Was about we tend to see things in the West sort of like quite independently. So perhaps language. So if you ask, for example, describe, you show somebody a pool with a fish in it and some, you say what's in there, and they'll go the stripy fish if they're Western. The stuff they've done in South Asia is more saying, where what do you see? And they'll say, well, we see this pool with sort of plants and a fish, so less about the individual thing. And partly it was about that with the judging the sport. It was about saying, actually, when Thais judge it, and they were judging it very consistently, to be honest, more consistently than we were at that point. What are they doing differently? And they were seeing it very much holistically. So rather than being, we counting the number of strikes somebody did, they're seeing a narrative that changes and shifts over the period of a whole bout. And so that was sort of interesting. Interesting, because I've asked AI about traditional Thai scoring, and it's actually pretty good. I didn't know how good it would be in being able to explain, but it actually is pretty good at understanding the nuances. So it's obviously picked up a non-English, and it is clearly it's Thai, less shared across the globe than English, but it's picked up those nuances and been able to use that, which I thought that's actually really good. People can now ask questions, and potentially in the future, I thought about perhaps set up a PhD where we used AI to judge, by using vision and potentially some other things, particularly with some of the newer models that actually do that. Can build.
This is why I always love talking to academics, because you get, they often have this very niche subject, and it just opens it up, and uh, this sort of sport and statistics, and now AI and building. I mean, it's very, it's nice that there is somewhere, there is a link to all of this, and you sort of build a career or a life or an experience on all these different things, and now you're, you know uh, 5 years ago, you might not have seen that actually all this work around AI in academia and research, and being able to build your own tools. I mean, maybe you were coding 5 years ago, but
Not anywhere near the level I am now. I did code because you do a little bit of coding in statistics, really, but but certainly not building the stuff I am now. No, no, not at all.
and it's lovely, isn't it, that you can, you can see a clear line between what you've studied and learned in your professional and private life, and you can bring it all together, and these things, you're always drawing on that knowledge. I think one of the things that I think has come out of this conversation, that has really resonated with me, is that even this new technology, using the principles, the theories, the methodology that has been developed over a long period of time, can help us to use this new technology more effectively, govern it better, etc. And I think that's one of the things that's really resonated with me. I guess as we sort of draw this conversation to a close, it's been absolutely fascinating, but I'd be interested in what you think, what we might be talking about in 2 years' time. I mean, 2 years doesn't feel like very long, but in certainly with development of AI, that's a long time. What do you think we might be talking about in 2 years as your relationship with this technology develops?
Yeah, I think it'll be about where do we fit, where do we use it, how do we use AI alongside what we are as humans. I mean, this is probably even maybe going, longer than 2 years ahead. It's about, I think and of course, products are really important. So products are really important for all sorts of things, but they're not the only thing. It's that, so the processes can be really important. So in terms of, I don't know, students learning, I think schools and HE have been guilty of promoting only the product. So they're interested in the grade. What grade did I get, rather than what I learned? How did I learn? What sort of value did I get? So I think hopefully we'll get back to something alongside, particularly if we have to shift assessment in the light of AI, to valuing the process and learning as much as, and that goes for learning in business and learning in outside of a formal education setting. But we still value what is human. So we value our experiences and things, all those things. We make decisions not just on information. A language model will make decisions very effective, can make decisions very effective, or at least present scenarios very effectively, rather than rely on it to make the final decision. But we make decisions with our emotions. We make decisions with our real world connection, and I think that's something where, however far forward we go, we could still, that's still going to be important. Those decisions based on our values. And human values are not, I think that there's lots about AI safety, about, well, we need to make sure that human values are built in. Well, they're not one thing. That's the problem. Human values shift across people, across cultures, across geography, whatever. But we individually can still apply our values and our beliefs to particular decisions we make, even though they can be really strongly informed by AI. And AI, like you mentioned, can actually give us alternative perspectives we might not have considered. So even though I think we need to retain the human, we need to retain all those things that are uniquely human. We have this, we grow up in a world with, where we interact constantly physically. We do learn language. We do interact with others. But we can use and harness AI to support the things we're less good at, or challenge our views where, because it's got such a vast array of different perspectives, we can get, it's very easy. We're very prone to sort of confirmation bias. Oh yes, that's it. That was true. I knew it was the case. Or hindsight bias. But if we get, I think, using AI, however well it develops in the future, and whether it's exponential rise continues or not, then it's a very useful tool to challenge what some of the poor things or the things we're less good at as being human. We will have biases, as you said. AI's got the biases built in, but can also challenge those things and say, okay, this is what I think. What would be really legitimate alternative perspectives? And it gives us, then we still make the decision based on our own situation, cultures, beliefs, and whatever values, but at least we can get alternatives generated we might not have had access to previously.
No, I absolutely agree. And you must get asked this question quite a lot. I know I do. How do you answer the question, what should I be learning now in the future of AI? What is it that I should be doing? Because some of the things we might have been answering even 3 years ago, 5 years ago, those things have changed quite a bit, haven't they?
They have, yeah, absolutely. So I think some of so it's more, and even this might shift. So at the moment, it might be making bigger decisions. So web developers, or developers of software, are now more managers of what's happening, because agentic AI is doing the coding. You might need an oversight. You might need, to think about, what do I need. So it's almost like orchestrating things, and that might be the case with other things as well. Where do I orchestrate some of these things in the future? Who knows, that I might get good at that, so it might even be more, even be more removed. But it's about, still, for me, it'd still be us using this as a tool rather than the tool using us in that way, to make sure that happens, whatever way that is, that we still use AI as a tool we've built, like we used other tools. We've throughout history we've used tools. And so still things about learning about how we evaluate evidence, how we make good decisions, how we critically evaluate situations, or how we identify problems, because we need to say, this is a problem because it's a problem to us. It might not be a problem to AI, it might be a problem to anybody else, but it's a problem to us. How do I articulate that problem to be able to, at least, even if AI is super intelligent, how do I articulate that to get the right response, or a useful series of responses I could choose from? And so I think all of those things, those sort of tools that you mentioned, the fact that we're using now is applying those systems we've had for a long time, really, about verification, about, putting arguments together. That they'll still stand potentially. I mean, who knows? I mean, this is, we're bad at predicting the future. There's no flying cars about, but that's been predicted lots of times. And we would have had I remember using the internet and going, oh, this seems slow. I'm not sure this will catch on, with the dial up, and it was taking forever to get a web page up, and they're a bit limited, and just look where that's gone. So I wouldn't particularly be, banking much money on my vision of the future. But yeah, that's sort of what I think. Still, those things are important going forward.
I think I agree with you, and I've done a bit of vibe coding as well, and you do become an orchestrator of the system, and it's really fun. I mean, the amount of enjoyment you can get out of being creative, and you having this developer by your side that can,
I trained as an artist when I left school, so I didn't then pursue it, but I went to art college when I left school. So I've always been interested in the creative side of things. But now, I think if I had the tools now, I've got the kids doing like videos, where they're in the video and there's crocodiles swimming up a river, and you've got, this is amazing. Some of the tools for tweaking visuals, and it's now, of course, giving potential to people who've got great ideas but didn't have the physical skill. I've always been able to draw okay, but draftsmanship, but that's not necessarily the same quite as creativity. So I think, it's an enabler. It like anything else. I was having conversation with people at work saying it's both the possibility of de-skilling but also enabling, just a bit like mental arithmetic. if you're a shopkeeper, you do not need to be great at mental arithmetic now. But when I was a kid, you did. You would have been given the wrong change if you hadn't. So it's people don't have not, still do a mental arithmetic, but it just enables some people who can't do it to have jobs they might not have been able to do. And that might be the case going forward with AI too.
Well, I think that's a really positive note. Tony, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I think I could probably talk to you. I could talk to you for hours. The chances of that happening are quite difficult. It's for those of you who don't know, it's as hot as hell in the UK, and we're both melting. But it's been lovely. I'll put a link to all the resources you've produced down below, etc., and so that people can go and check them out. They really are fantastic. But Tony, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. And
thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. See you
Brilliant.
soon.
Thank you.
Good.